Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes have revealed they fell into a trap in this current set of regulations, but believe they have figured it out going into next season's W15 car. The question is, will it be too little too late for Mercedes in this cycle of regulations, given Red Bull seemed to understand this and Adrian Newey did from day one. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, we have to discuss this fantastic picture that came out a couple of hours ago on Flavio Briatore's Instagram page. It puts this up here, and we of course see, let's just break it down, I guess. So this is Flavio Briatore, a controversial character to say the least here in Formula 1, who, despite being banned from Formula 1 for, he was the managing director, and he's had a very long and extensive and very interesting life, but he was the managing director at Renault in 2008 when the Singapore Grand Prix Crashgate saga happens. Nelson Piquet Jr. crashes, Alonso gets the victory, and it was revealed in the coming year or so that this was a deliberate intention by Renault to do this. Briatore was involved, and for various reasons he's a rather controversial character and has eventually been, was at the time ousted from the sport, but he has friends in high places, and I'm sure he's a very wealthy man in various ways. He has this billionaire club thing going on, and he invites out to meet him for dinner. On his left here is, of course, Mr. Lawrence Stroll, billionaire in his own right, owner of Aston Martin, and then on just about you guys can see on screen, Mr. Toto Wolff on the right-hand side. I believe Toto Wolff is also technically a billionaire now as well. I think he was officially, basically his stock in Mercedes has gone up in value over the last couple of years, so he's now sitting pretty at that milestone. Not like it really matters if you're worth like 600 million or a billion, but still, congratulations, I guess. And so here we go, Flavio Briatore, Lawrence Stroll, Toto Wolff, and on the left-hand side, very interesting, you gotta say, is Stefano Domenicali, top guy over in the Formula 1 side. So you've got to wonder what's going on here, right? Because we often see stuff like this when you've got these guys meeting up, and we know that Stroll and Wolff are good friends. I think that Toto Wolff has bought some stock in Aston Martin as well, so there's a relationship there. They supply the engines and all this. Briatore, he's a cool customer in Formula 1, and then you've got the top guy, so I know people are going to look at this and think there's something going on here, right? Like they're having discussions and they're making sure that Domenicali's had a few drinks and now they're giving him some ideas on maybe how we could change the regulations. What do we think about the 2026 rules? And potentially trying to steer things in their favour. Of course, nothing confirmed on that, but I thought it was a great image to at least mention. And I've got to read this out for you guys because I Googled this image, like reverse image search, to see if anyone was talking about it. And I found this article. I don't know who's written this or why they've written this or where this has come from, but this reads like a fanfic and there's no author attached to this, but I had to read it out because it's too funny. So amidst the glitz and the glamour, so they're basically trying to describe what's going on in the image. The group huddled around the table, the air heavy with whispered plans as Briatore leaned in with a conspiratorial wink while Stroll and Wolff exchanged knowing glances. Meanwhile, Chief Steward Domenicali valiantly held his own, clutching his sparkling water like a trophy while subtly swapping wine glasses, ensuring that the group's conniving schemes were as muddled as the rain-soaked track on race day. So, I couldn't have written anything better than that myself, but we're going to leave that there for now. Now, speaking of Red Bull, not represented there at that specific table, there has been some talk about Perez going into 2024, right, next season. I think the only way that Perez doesn't stay in his seat next year and they terminate his contract early is if Daniel Ricciardo really shows out in the second half of this year. If he dispatches of Yuki Tsunoda, Red Bull might think, you know what, let's bring Danny Rick back in now. Otherwise, they might give it another year and we'll see how Perez's contract ends. But I'm almost certain he's not going to be there post 2024 because in 2025 the seat will be open, and Christian Horner says there is a lot of interest in drivers for the seat, obviously, right? Like, who wouldn't want to drive for Red Bull right now? But as he says, Perez and Ricciardo, but also drivers outside their spectrum as well regarding 2025. So I imagine they'll probably replace that at the time. He also confirms that pretty much they're done with upgrades for this current car, and we've heard from Mercedes that they'll bring more things, but it's more about optimizing their package and understanding it than it is bringing loads of new upgrades for the upcoming races, because everyone's wanting to focus on next year. Even Williams are focusing on next year, right? Even Alex Albon says here that even back in April, they were already focusing on next year's car, doing the simulator work for the 2024 version. So look, maybe Williams are going to cook something up just how Aston Martin did this year. Would be good to see the Williams redemption arc. I'm certainly there for it, but I'm not sure I'm going to have too much faith that that is going to happen. But every team's doing this now, and Mercedes have confirmed this recently as well. well. As James Allison says, at this stage of the year, the wind tunnel is heavily focused on 2024. Large chunks of the drawing office, the vehicle dynamics, the manufacturing for the long lead time production items are starting to gather their skirts. From the summer break onwards, next year's car is where the largest call is answered. But what do they need to change for next year's car? Because they clearly have made lots of mistakes, and honestly, every time Mercedes speak about this current car concept, it feels like they just don't have the depth of understanding of this set of regulations that they did previously, and certainly than Red Bull do. Mike Elliott said that over the winter they looked at various other bodywork approaches and nothing was better, right? I think they even said this, that they trialed it in the simulator, testing and stuff, with the side pods on, and then they didn't see any benefits. They thought, right, let's keep the zero pods, and then they realized when the season began, yeah, this concept doesn't have the ceiling that we need it to, and they made apparently quite a lot of gains in the simulator. We've seen some of those on track, but not all of them, it's got to be said. And they also discussed this trap of the regulations, as it were, and maybe people that watch the old school F1 days where there used to be ground effect right back in the 70s could maybe have predicted some of this stuff, because back then they used to have skirts on the car, active suspension, they did all this stuff to enable the ground effect to work a little bit, but it got a bit too powerful and they decided to get rid of it. They've brought it back, but you can no longer put a skirt on the car to seal in the air. So what you're trying to do is use the airflow around the side pods, the side of the car, to seal off the floor and also run the car as low to the ground as possible. And this is, in theory, what makes a ground effect car work. Run it as close to the ground as you possibly can, maximize the downforce from the floor of the car, but that generates its fair share of issues. The W13, it was rapid in the simulator, but they put it on track, they were too low to the ground, it porpoised all over the place, they lose a lot of the performance, it's difficult for the drivers, and nobody wants stuff like that. And this is where a lot of the debate regarding the suspension comes into play, and this is arguably why Red Bull have such a great advantage right now. They've set up their suspension from year one of these set of regulations in such a way that it just helps them an awful lot. This anti-dive, anti-squat setup on the suspension, so the car at the front and the rear is almost always perfectly level, means that they don't have to run the car quite as stiff as they would otherwise, and still have the floor very much where it wants to be, just above the ground, generating a lot of downforce. You guys can see in Spa, the car that was sparking the most was the Red Bull, and yet it still didn't have any porpoising. When it was going up a Rouge, Radeon, like, it was sparking the most, it's bottoming out the most, but yet it still is perfect in pretty much all other conditions, and they can maximize the downforce by lowering the ride height, and still they don't suffer the issues that Mercedes suffer from. When they run their car close to the ground, it sparks a bit up Radeon, probably not even quite as low of a ride height as Red Bull were running, but still then the Mercedes is porpoising down the straights at Belgium, and they've probably got to raise the ride height to fix that, so then you lose some performance. This is the issue Mercedes are running into, and Mike Elliott said that it was a bit of a trap of running the car close to the ground, because to do so you've got to run the suspension very stiff so it can stay there and not fluctuate so much, and there's a bit of a balance in terms of getting that right. And James Allison went on to say that all the teams were trying to have some protection against bouncing over the winter, and they had to run the question, do you go really aggressive and hope you fix the porpoising but maximize performance, or do you take a more cautious approach where you ensure there's going to be no big bouncing issues that the W13 had, but is it going to be too cautious? And that's what Mercedes say, that's what their mistake was. They actually went so far the other way that their car was a bit too cautious, and now they've tried to make changes to catch up and correct the mistakes they made over the winter. And every word here that Mercedes say doesn't necessarily indicate they have a really great grasp on this set of regulations, because it seems like this trap that they're discussing of running the car too low, Red Bull understood that from day one, I think, and it seems like Newey knew that it was the suspension situation that was going to be more beneficial than having a more traditional suspension but running it really stiff and the car close to the ground was going to cause issues. The Red Bull never suffer with any of that, and maybe they're like 2 years ahead of Mercedes in understanding in some respects, which is definitely not where Mercedes want to be if they have any chance of catching them up until pretty much 2026, when the regulations are going to change yet again. So Mercedes have said here, and Mike Elliott did say, that they now know, they think that they're in the right spot for the winter, because when you're doing the wind tunnel runs, you don't have infinite amounts of them, right? You've got limited testing restrictions, especially for teams at the higher end of the grid. So as Mike Elliott says, when you do these wind tunnel runs, you've got to choose a ride height. You can't just do the test at high ride height, low ride height, medium ride height, and cover all the bases. You don't have the time. So you've got to choose one and go for it. They think that now they know what to do. Maybe running the car a little bit higher, or maybe a change in the suspension to make sure it's going to work. But yeah, Mercedes definitely didn't nail it, far from nailing it. And they talk a good game that they finally found the right height sweet spot. But still, I mean, we saw at Belgium, they haven't, with this current set of upgrades they brought, that was causing them issues in Belgium, costing them time, especially compared to Red Bull, who were, again, the fastest car on the weekends. And just to put that into perspective, wanted to look at this, I thought was pretty interesting. So since 2010, these are the amount of points that the championship leader has had since, well, at the halfway point of the season, or okay, let's say after 12 races, because definitely nowadays there's more races than there were previously. Now, admittedly, the last few years there's been sprint races, right? So Verstappen has a few extra points now than he maybe would otherwise enjoy, but nonetheless, Verstappen's still holding the record by a long way. 314 points, the only driver ever in the last, 13 years or so to have over 300 after 12 races. Just looking how competitive the 2010 and the 2012 seasons were, they only had 160 points or so, the leader, pretty much half of what Verstappen has today. The highest that Hamilton ever had was 256 actually in 2020. As I say, no sprint races then, so a little bit different, but not substantially. And I feel kind of bad here for the Tifosi and the Ferrari fans that have, two of their drivers in this period were leading after 12 races. And unfortunately for Ferrari, neither of those ended up winning the championship. And just to pose this question for you guys to close out with, the theory was here from motorsport.com, they came out and said, all right, you've got 10 laps of Silverstone. Who wins out of these 4? So if you look at this over the course of a season or over the course of an entire Grand Prix, then it might be different. But who are you going to pick here? So Verstappen in an AlphaTauri, Logan Sargent in a Red Bull, Yuki Tsunoda in the Ferrari, or Alonso in a Williams. I would say I would probably pick Yuki, to be honest. I think you've really got to say that, let's say over an entire race distance or over an entire season, I think I would say Yuki for sure. Alonso's a great driver. He's better than Albon as far as I'm concerned, but he's not better enough than Albon to put that Williams to be like, to actually do better than a Ferrari or a Red Bull. Same with Verstappen and an AlphaTauri. Okay, I'm sure he could do a better job than the drivers in that car, but I don't think he's going to be banging it on podiums, right? The car isn't good enough. So then it comes down to, as far as I'm concerned, the Red Bull or the Ferrari. Is Sargent, as a rookie, would he have enough? There's so many variables here to even consider this. The Red Bull is the fastest car. Around a circuit like Belgium, I'm taking Sargent in the Red Bull. But around other circuits and over a season, I think I would probably take Yuki, possibly. But I don't know. It's an interesting question. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.